Hey there, Patriots. Welcome back to Front Lines. Death Watch here to give you guys more intel so you can update your personal armory and fight back against the fake news media machine. And today we'll be talking about a disgusting video coming out of Yorkshire. I guess it's called Leeds, West Yorkshire, United Kingdom, where a bunch of officers just decide that, oh, we're going to drag this autistic girl out of her home because she dared to say that one of the police officers looked like a lesbian, which reminded her of her nana. Okay. Connor Thomason has the story here. West Yorkshire police identified as victims after a group of their officers were filmed dragging an autistic girl from her home for asking if an officer was a lesbian. Right, the foot soldiers of progressivism will kidnap your children and have the gall to call themselves oppressed. Right, you got the story here. From 12:12 a.m. on Monday, August 7th, police received calls from a family of a 16-year-old girl who was reportedly intoxicated and putting herself at risk in Leeds city center. Officers attended at about 1 a.m. and drove the teenager to her home so she could be appropriately looked after. Upon returning her to the address, comments were made which resulted in the girl being arrested on suspicion of homophobic public order offense. The nature of the comments made was fully captured on body-worn video. When the girl was eventually fit to be interviewed, the interview took place with an appropriate adult. Right, and the mother of this girl posted the entire, posted this entire police response on TikTok, which is good on her. And so we're going. It's a 2 minute, right? A full 2 minute 47-second video. We're only going to look at about like 30 seconds or so to get the full context here.
She's got autism. Can you just stand there? She's in a cupboard. She can't go anywhere. She can't go anywhere. Stand there, dear. They're going to remove her for what? Because you're bothered. She said the word lesbian. Her nana is a lesbian. She's married to a woman. She's not homophobic. Look what you're clenching your fist. Go away from my teenage daughter.
What is up with you?
There's something wrong with you, mate. She didn't aim it at the police officer.
Not homophobic remarks at my colleague.
It's not a homophobic remark. She said, I think she's a lesbian like Nana.
If you want to
Right. So all they're trying to arrest her under the suspicion of homophobic remarks, despite the fact that, the girl is autistic and said, hey, this person looks like a lesbian, like my grandmother, right? Her nana. Okay. So again, it's most like it definitely is coming from a sense, the girl is autistic, so it's definitely no real ill intention behind that. But the police officer in this video clearly got offended by it, right? Clearly, when this girl asked her, right, are you a lesbian like my nana? She got offended by it, and then was like, hey, this girl made a homophobic remark about me, and so they all came in full seven men deep to come and drag this girl out of her home, right? And they literally dragged her from her home, right? And as I continue the story, it's going to get far worse. Okay, and so you got the BBC covering it, but you also got Pink News, which is a pro-LGBTQ website in the United Kingdom, who is also saying that, hey, this went too far, right? Like, what are you guys doing? So police dragged autistic girl out of house because she said officer looked like her lesbian grandmother. Right, West Yorkshire police have been accused of manhandling an autistic girl because she said an officer looked like her grandmother, who is a lesbian. The 16-year-old was arrested for, let me zoom in a little bit here. The 16-year-old was arrested for a homophobic public order offense. Police confirmed to Pink News as footage of the incident sparked widespread outrage on social media. The girl's mother, Lisa, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that last name, accused the force of being bullies in uniform in a TikTok video. The video explained that while police were visiting their home, the teenager said an officer looked like her nana, who is a lesbian, and that the officer took it the wrong way and said it was homophobic. Quote, my daughter was having panic attacks from being touched by them, and they still continue to manhandle her, right? In the video, the mother can be heard telling the officers to stop staring at her daughter due to her autism, while the daughter can be heard screaming, hitting herself, and crying while officers attempted to grab her. Okay, so at the end, the teenager is dragged from her home by multiple officers, despite the mother telling the officers that she suffers from scoliosis and a twisted spine. And in the video that's been widespread all over Twitter, they're literally yanking on her arms, pulling her and dragging her away, despite the fact that she has a twisted spine and scoliosis, which is causing her far more extreme pain. Okay, so yeah, these officers should be all thrown in jail. Thrown in jail, lock away the key. This family should deserve some type of reparations from that. Okay. On X, formerly known as Twitter, people called the video distressing and very upsetting. One user said the conduct from Westshire police officers was totally unacceptable, while another condemned the forced behavior as disgusting. Okay, so you even have a pro LGBTQ website in the United Kingdom saying that straight out that, hey, you guys took this the wrong way and you guys are, shouldn't have done this. So there shouldn't be any excuse as to, oh, well, we're still going to arrest her, right? And there shouldn't be any type of repercussions for these police officers in their behavior. Okay? And so while I'll say, like, again, this is an egregious event that went down, right? These police officers should be locked up. This also shouldn't be a surprise to anybody outside of the United Kingdom or inside the United Kingdom, right? Because you kind of you see this type of behavior all the time, right? Especially during these past few years, right? Because in the United Kingdom, especially the EU and Canada, and I can probably toss Mexico in there, when it comes to freedom of speech, they don't have the same type of freedom of speech. They don't even have the same type of Bill of Rights, right? We in America, we're unique because we have the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was created because the founding fathers said that, hey, these are the rights that are given to us as Americans, not by the state, but by a higher power, meaning God, right? And so, therefore, the state is only here to ensure that every American is allowed to exercise their God-given rights in a environment where they cannot be impeded upon, right? When somebody impedes upon your right, well, then you are able to sue not only the individuals impeding on your right, freedom of speech, whether it be, libel, slander, defamation lawsuits, things like that, or if the government comes out and says, hey, you guys aren't allowed to practice your religion, you guys aren't allowed to practice whatever, right? You are able to sue the state and say, hey, you are interfering in my God-given right, and therefore you are considered a tyrannical government, right? A tyrannical government is trying to take your rights away and trying to replace God, trying to replace God with the state. Essentially, is what the kind of the meaning behind a lot of this, right? What the founding fathers wrote. Okay, in the United Kingdom, the EU, Mexico, and Canada, they don't believe in that. They believe that yes, your rights come from the state, and at any given point, depending on the political positions of the newly elected people, your rights can be curtailed at whenever they decide, right? If they depend, and we have seen that throughout the years. One thing that progressives have been trying to push for years here in America is the idea of hate speech, right? Hate speech does not exist. Hate speech has been determined by the Supreme Court that it doesn't exist because we already have a litmus test of what is considered what is considered protected under your First Amendment right. Okay, you are not allowed to overtly say, hey, I'm going to do this or that person, or tell somebody to go and commit acts of violence, right? We already have that as one litmus test. And then we also have other litmus tests that says, hey, you can't, there's certain words that you cannot say, you cannot say to somebody that will somehow force them to be enraged enough to commit an actual act, right? This is all stuff that you learn, right? If you're a journalist, right? If you ever go to school for journalism, whatever, right? This is all considered media law, right? These are all you go through the First Amendment and freedom of press, freedom of assembly, all these other things that the reason why the news exists is because of freedom of press. Okay, and so you have to learn everything about the First Amendment in the your media law class if you ever take one. Very insightful, definitely insightful. And one thing, my media law professor, who was an actual, actually went to, I think, law school, right? He had to go to law school to actually be a First Amendment lawyer in media law. And he openly was like, yeah, hate speech does not exist. Okay, the Supreme Court had ruled that it does not exist, and here's why. We went through the entirety of the First Amendment and say, hey, these are the litmus tests that says, hey, these are the things that the lines that you cannot cross. Okay, and so again, when it comes to the UK, calling somebody or saying somebody looks like a lesbian, well, they clearly can say, oh, well, that's homophobic, and therefore we're going to arrest you for saying something homophobic. Whereas here in America, you know, sorry, you say something homophobic that is essentially like is subjective, right? It's not objective, it's very subjective, right? Somebody can be offended by being called a lesbian, somebody cannot be offended by being called a lesbian, right? Same thing can be said about several different other words, right? Even slurs in the First Amendment, right? You can call certain people slurs, and hey, is or can you get taken away from, and will the police show up and arrest you and lock you up in jail? No, not in America, but in Canada, in Mexico, especially, you can say that about, if you say anything about their politicians, right? You will have the cartel showing up at your door, right? But in the EU, you can't say certain things about politicians. You can't call, you can't call certain politician names. You can't call certain people names in without getting a knock at your door by police officers, right? Here in America, they're like, as long as you are not, as long as you're not defaming or libel or slandering somebody by calling them this thing, and they can prove that by you calling them this, they somehow had some type of financial loss, right? Or that you calling that person this was completely defamation and slander, and therefore they're entitled to some type of reparations from that slander that you said to them or said about them or whatever, right? We have, again, that goes into the different decrees of different things that you can and cannot say, and if you do say so, where does it fall within that freedom of speech? Are you really, does that really offend somebody to the point that they can pursue defamation lawsuits or slander lawsuits or reparations? Or are they a person such as a famous person or a politician where it's very hard for them to prove that you calling them a bad name or you saying something mean about them actually cost them some type of financial issue, right? So, that's just a little bit of backstory, right? But this is why you also see in, when it comes to social media, right? All social media platforms nowadays all have some type of hate speech clause in them, right? Because again, all of these progressives, right? A lot of these social media platforms operate in Silicon Valley or in deep blue cities, right? Such as New York City, Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco, LA. That's where mainly where Silicon Valley is in California, right? And so they all are mainly progressive individuals or people who came from different countries where they believe that your rights come from the state. And so if they feel that you are saying something mean or hateful, what they consider hateful, because that term hateful is, again, subjective, right? They all will say, well, yes, we 100% believe that laws should be made to curtail that, right? They don't agree with the First Amendment. They want to do away with the First Amendment. They want to do away with a lot of our Bill of Rights, our God-given rights. And to curtail it, that, right? And so of course, when you look at these social media platforms, of course, they have these type of clauses in them because, again, a lot of these people operate in deep blue progressive cities where they want to adopt the kind of EU terms of service of the first of essentially freedom of speech, right? Because the UK, Canada, the EU, they don't believe in the First Amendment, right? They believe in the idea of a free press or the idea of people being able to freely speak. However, at any given time, depending on the political change or the political climate, they can curtail that and do away with it whenever they feel so. Because again, your rights come from the state, not from a higher power, right? In America, our rights comes directly from God. Okay, the state is only here to ensure that every American is allowed to exercise their God-given right in an environment where we can have the ability to push back against people who dare to try to curtail our God-given rights. Okay, so that's this a very unique thing that is, it's kind of crazy that people are not being taught that here in America, right? But it's kind of intentional, right? It's really intentional because, again, a lot of these progressives want to adopt this kind of EU, UK, European style of freedom of expression, right? Where the states, the governments are allowed to curtail and do away with whatever they want, right? Whenever these progressives decide that certain things should not be allowed to be said about them or about things that they support, well, then they will happily go into these court systems and change the laws to force you, the opposition, to stay silent, right? And that right there is what? Fascism. Or in American speak, in freedom speak, tyranny. A tyrant is somebody who is trying to replace God with themselves and by, with the state, right? They are trying to become the state, and they're trying to use the power of the state to replace God and curtail your God-given rights. So, like always, stay safe, stay sane, be vigilant, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you patriots on the front lines.